Doug Hansgate here. Thought I'd bring you a three-part series in masking. All you need to know, and probably more than you want to know about masking. So let's get started. Okay, so what is masking anyway? I'm going to take us over to Photoshop and show you there where I think it's a little bit easier to explain. So I'm going to just send this image over to Photoshop so that we can take a look at it. All right, now over here in the layers panel. So this is the basic Photoshop layout workspace, except that I have moved my tools from this side where they normally sit over to where I like to put them over here, just because it's easier for me to move this distance than all the way across the screen. So at any rate, this is your standard photo workspace. So let's just look at that. So I'm in the photography workspace and I have a single layer. Now if I were to put a layer on top of this background layer by simply coming down to the bottom and clicking this little plus sign to get me a new layer. Now that layer sits on top of this image. Now if I were to take a paintbrush and let's just paint with black, and I'm going to just make a 100% solid brush and just start to paint with black. So you can see that this layer is sitting on top of my bird, and we have this black brush painted on top of my bird. So this great blue heron is being hidden by this black. What a mask does is hides a portion of this layer. So were I to put a mask on here, and we have a couple different ways. We can come down here to the bottom and let's just put a mask on by clicking this little icon down below our mask icon. Were we to put a mask on this layer, what this mask does is hides whatever is underneath it. So this mask hides this. So if I paint with black on this layer, and let's just paint with black. If I paint with black on that layer, this black is hiding what I painted over here. So I can see my great blue heron again. Now, that may be a little confusing to you. So let's do it a little bit different way. I'm just going to delete this layer. So let's take this layer and let's go ahead and duplicate that layer. So I'm going to just grab that layer and duplicate it. So I have a duplicate layer. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the blend mode. And I'm going to just go to multiply. Actually, it went to color burn. Just that's fine as well. So this layer now is color burned on top of my original layer. But I could put a mask on here to hide some of this color burning. So I go back and say, look, I really want to put a mask on. Put a mask on that layer. Now when I put a mask on that layer, what I've done is given myself the ability to hide this color burn layer. So now I can come and say, well, let's just go ahead and paint my great blue heron. So this mask is hiding this effect, this color burn layer. Well, that's kind of nice, except that we have a couple of options with that. So one of the options that we have with that is that we can double click on this mask, and if I double click on the mask, I will get the properties for the mask. So now in the properties of a mask, we have a couple of things that we can do. We can modify the mask, select and refine. We can choose a color range for the mask. We can invert the mask. So we can also change the density of that mask. And this is just the mask itself. So if we change the density of the mask, you'll see that the mask went from pure black to light gray. So we can change the density all the way down and say, look, let's just make that mask just be a very light density. All right? Well, that's one thing we can do. We can also feather that mask for a transition so that the feathering of that mask gives us the ability to be able to say, let's just make this mask smoother. And I can show you this mask if I hold the Alter Option key and click on the mask. So you can see how the mask, instead of having harsh transitions like we have here, has smooth transitions. Well, that could be really handy when we're trying to do some of our editing work, because that smooth transition gives us the ability to be able to example, paint this mask with a little more accuracy. So I'm going to just click on my layer again and say, well, boy, if we're going to be able to feather that mask, maybe instead of painting this so rudely and crudely, I would have said, let's go ahead and just delete this mask. So I'm going to just grab this mask and throw it to the trash can and just delete it. Now, let's add a new mask, and this time I'm going to paint with a black brush. So I've got my black brush. But here, instead of painting rather haphazardly, I'm just going to be a little more careful with how I paint my blue heron. And so I'm going to just get a little bit smaller brush and come in here and say, look, I really want that blue heron. And I'm still being, this is not a great paint job, but I'm still being a little more careful about what I'm painting. And so let's come down here and say, let's maybe paint his foot, and come down here and paint this foot. Now, using our mask, I can now look at the mask and say Alter Option and click on it, and you can see that it's a very harsh mask. But if I feather that mask, I can feather that mask, and then when I look at my original layer, you'll see that you don't see as drastic of a change. Yes, there's still some haloing around it, and we'll talk about haloing in maybe the next episode of this, because this is going to be a 3-part series on masking. But we have this haloing around it, but we also notice that the bird itself does not appear to be quite as bad because I've feathered it. Now, had I been even a little bit more careful, I could have done this a little bit more accurately by just not going to the outside of my great blue heron, right? So let's take this mask and just delete this one, and just delete the mask before removing or before applying. And now I'm going to just add a new mask, and this time what I'm going to do is paint with black, except what I'm going to do is just stay in the inside. I'm not gonna try to get too crazy and paint to the outside of my great blue heron. Gonna just stay away from the edges. And down here, I'm going to stay away from the edges. I'm going to grab a smaller brush, and I'm going to just say, let's grab those feet, smaller brush. And again, I'm not being very accurate, but you get the idea. All right. Now, you can see I've overblown this a little bit, so let's just do that, and then hold the X key to change the color from black to white. And what I'm going to do is just get rid of some of that extra that I put on that beak. So now I'm painting with white on a mask. And the old saying is that black conceals and white reveals. So my black mask, Alter Option, click on the mask, shows you the mask, and you say, oh, I've got to fix this. So I hit X to go to black and fix this little spot here, and you say, all right, So now I'm pretty accurate as far as my mask, although, you know, it is just a pencil sketch, right? But now let's go back to my layer and click on my image. And then double click on the mask again so we get the mask property showing. And as I feather that mask now, because I stayed inside of my great blue heron, you can see that I can actually do a pretty decent job of altering that image with a hand painted mask. This is the basic of masking. We use black and white and variations thereof, which we'll get into in more detail as we go through the class, but variations thereof to change this mask. The mask is really just hiding whatever this subject is here in that layer. So the mask hides whatever in that layer. And this is the foundations of a mask in general. We're going to show you some techniques in series 2 and 3 that are going to take this masking to another whole level. But I need you to understand the potential of this. So even just if I were to say, let's go ahead and create a new layer here, a new image. And let's just say that I took and created something by just taking, say, our ellipse tool and said, look, let's go ahead and fill that with a color. So I'm going to choose a color, and my color is going to be red. And so I fill my ellipse with that red color. Hit Control or Command D to deselect. Now if I put a mask on this layer by clicking my mask object down here, and I take a paintbrush and I paint with black, I can easily just take and hide this layer. Now because I am on the background layer, when I hide this layer, I get the transparency, which is indicated by those little tiny squares, those gray and white squares, which means that I have a transparent background. Now, had I put the circle on its layer with a white background, I would have just taken and eliminated the circle. So let's just kind of backspace a couple of steps here. And what I'm going to do is create a new layer. And on this new layer, I'm going to say Edit Fill. And now what I'm doing is I'm putting that circle onto my new layer. And if I take that new layer and put a mask on that layer, now because I had my selection, those marching ants, when I hit the layer icon, it gave me a mask of the selected marching ants, and it automatically gave me a layer with the background blacked out and the white, meaning my selection, visible. So my little mistake of not deleting my selection shows us that we can now create a mask by making a selection. But this selection works, or this mask works no differently than any other mask. You see that we have black on the outside of the mask. I hold Alt-Option and here's my mask. Black is concealing, so we're not seeing anything that's out here. And to prove this to you, let's just go back to my layer. And on this layer, what I'm going to do is make certain that I have no selection made. And I'm going to take a brush and I'm going to paint with another color. So I'm going to paint with blue. And on this layer, I'm going to come out here and I'm going to paint away. And you say, wait a minute, Doug, you can't see anything. But you see the layer, you see the blue that I've painted here? Now if I hold Shift on my mask and click on my mask, it temporarily hides my mask. And you can see that I've actually painted blue. And as I paint blue, you can see that it is painting blue on this layer. But my mask will only reveal where there is white. Remember, white reveals. So if somebody was walking around with a mask on and they had a black mask on, the only thing you would see is the whites of their eyes. So if I take and click my mask again, you'll see that the only blue that I can see is where there is white in my mask. Now, just as in the previous example, I can take and affect this mask. So, for example, I could take and choose to reduce the density of that mask. What it did was it gave me the ability to see some of that blue in the background, and yet I still see the 100% of the center. Now, I can also feather the mask. If I feather the mask, what it will do is start to soften this mask so the white becomes softer, and I can start to see the transition of that blue into this circle. So we have those available to us. Now, the nice part about masking is that we have this mask properties that we can adjust. So I could, for example, say, look, what if I were to invert the mask? If I click on invert the mask over here inverts. So black is in the center now, and I can see everything outside of my mask. And I can hit invert again to go back to my original. So we have properties here which you're going to get into. We'll get into select and mask. We'll get into color range a little bit as well and talk about that because it's really an important feature. And we'll get into that in the second episode of this masking and all you need to know about it. I hope this has been helpful. I hope that you have learned the basics of masking, what a mask does. Because once you understand the basics of the mask, then what happens is we get the ability to use that mask in all kinds of ways, especially with things like our new selection tools and things with luminosity masking and color masking. So we'll get into those in the second and third episode of this. I hope this was helpful, and I hope that you learned a few things. We'll see you next week on Transform Tuesday.